Hello everybody, my name is Anthony Affert and welcome back to yet another episode of God's a Secret. In tonight's video, I'm going to be talking about the three gifts or theological virtues that God offers to each and every one of us, and we have the choice of either accepting or rejecting. And these three theological virtues are absolute gifts because what they do are unite and tie our souls closer and closer to God every time we practice them. Now the three theological virtues are faith, hope, and charity. Now, the first one of those three, faith, consists of two main things. First, believing all that God has taught and revealed to us, and B, trusting Him personally and letting Him into our hearts. Now, like I said earlier in the video, these three theological virtues are so great because every time we practice them, they all tie our souls closer to God. Now, what happens when we don't practice these virtues is we're succumbing to their vices or their opposites. And each time we succumb to their vices and don't practice these virtues, we're moving further and further away from God. And because, like I mentioned, there are two parts to faith, believing and trusting, there are two vices to faith as well, which are unbelief and mistrust. So just to recap that again real quick and make sure it makes sense, each one of these theological virtues brings our souls closer to God each time we practice it. So this first one, faith, is believing all that God has taught us and trusting Him and saying yes to Him with our hearts and letting Him into our lives. And each time we do that, it brings our souls closer and closer to God. And again, whenever we fail to practice these virtues, we're succumbing to their vices or their opposites, which for faith are unbelief and mistrust. Basically, failing to believe all that God has taught us and distrusting Him and not letting Him into our hearts. And again, every time we succumb to the vices or opposites of these virtues, we're moving further and further away from God. So now let's move on to the second theological virtue, which is hope, which is basically just faith directed towards the future. It means belief and faith in God's promises, especially His promise to save us. And like faith, hope also has two vices. Now, the two vices to hope are despair/hopelessness, which is the I cannot be saved kind of attitude, or presumption/arrogance, which is the I don't need to be saved kind of attitude, which are both obviously bad and therefore why there are vices. But when you think about it, you realize that they are both two extremes in which hope lies in the middle of. Because again, you have the one extreme in the side of despair and hopelessness, which is the attitude of I cannot be saved, and then the other extreme, which is presumption/arrogance and the attitude of I don't need to be saved. But then you have hope, which serves as the happy medium, because remember, hope is faith directed towards the future. So when you have hope, you not only have belief in God's teachings and that He died on the cross to save us from our sins and that we needed Him to do that, but then you also have trust that you will in fact be saved. So again, just to recap that real quickly, hope is faith directed towards the future. So when you have hope, you not only have belief in God's teachings, but also trust that God is going to keep His promises. And with that being said, it is now time to get into the third and final theological virtue, which is charity. Now, at least in this sense, charity probably does not mean what you think it means. You probably think it means, for example, donating to the homeless. But in this sense, charity simply means the most basic form of love, which is just willing good for others. And it simply means having that feeling for everybody. Now, the thing is, so many people hear that we're commanded to love everyone, and they think to themselves, how can we possibly do that? How can we control how we feel? And especially, how could this be a virtue if we can control our virtues when I can't control how I feel towards people? Well, that's the thing. When God says to love everybody, He doesn't mean the kind of love where like you feel all warm inside like when you see somebody. He simply means love in its most basic form. He means the type of love that we talk about when we talk about charity, which is simply willing good for others. It doesn't mean that you have to have a warm, fuzzy feeling for every single person in the world. It just means that you should wish every single person well. And charity has two vices, which are hatred and indifference, because obviously you are not willing good towards people when you are indifferent towards them or have hatred towards them. So charity is quite simply having the most basic form of love for every person you encounter, which is just willing them good. So with all that being said, those are the three theological virtues. They're three gifts from God, and each time we practice them, we bring our souls closer and closer to God. And just to recap, you have faith, hope, and charity. Faith, which is belief and trust in God. Hope, which is faith directed towards the future. And then you have charity, which is quite simply the most basic form of love for every person, which is just, again, like I just said, willing good for every person you encounter. And with all that being said, thank you for watching. I love you all. God bless.